Now let's go through a little bit deeper on some of the interfaces. So this is a variable interface. On the left hand side, I have actually taken domain vocabulary as a menu option. Within that, there is a tab, global variable. When that tab is clicked, it actually shows the entire interface. On the left hand side, there is a tree structure helps in navigating or drill downing the various objects. So, for example, here there are multiple apps, cart apps, then case diary apps, config apps, then inventory apps, and so on. And when you click on a particular apps, it shows what are the variable groups used then in that app and so on. So this is a typical interface WK Studio has, which has multiple accordions. If you see, this is one accordion, second, third, fourth, and fifth, and they are actually enabled based on the variable type or based on the option selected. So this is a typical interface, and let me go through one of the variables in detail. So just I just clicked on party, and then within party I clicked on email ID. So when you select a variable on the right hand side, it actually shows the complete details of that variable. There are hundreds of parameters which can be set, basic parameters, input output parameters, formatting options, HTML options, and so on. So here WK Studio supports multiple data types as a typical programming language, like right from big number to boolean to date, document, double, matrix, and so on. Okay, this is typical this one. And there are quite number of parameters as you see on the screen. And then based on the functionality, there can be other dynamic parameters which can be set. For example, what is the minimum value variable to be set, which will automatically set the value minimum maximum at runtime. What is the default variable value? Then for example, what are the image parameters, like from where the image will be loaded if it happens to be a document image variable, and so on. So there can be a lot of parameters which are defined runtime. There can be a parameters, like for example, here if you see, like whether variable values to be saved as a context or a variable value can be a multilingual and so on. So these parameters can be set. Now when at the execution time, a particular variable can take values from multiple sources. It can take from a simple predefined menu, it can take from database dynamic menu at runtime based on the context, or it can take from executing a query from a database, or it can even retrieve the data from a spreadsheet, based on the requirement. Or when that variable is invoked, a particular form can be invoked at runtime. Again, there are a lot of code which can be added, like whenever a variable is needed, whether a particular functionality is to be executed, or whenever a variable is added, you want to set other variables that can be set here, based on the requirement. There are a lot of formatting options which can be included when a variable is declared. Like for example, here if it is using barcode, then barcode parameters can be used. If it is using QR code, then QR code parameters can be set, or even C# format can be set based on the requirement. Again, whether at the output level, language output is to be shown, or capitalize each word, or show image, all these parameters can be set. These are HTML parameters at runtime. So, for example, email ID as a variable. So it says it's going to take the value in text box. Email ID is supposed to be entered and so on. Okay, and there can be like whether input is mandatory, whether it is as a search page or home page. All these UI parameters can be set. Again, when a variable is invoked or a web page corresponding to a variable is invoked, one doesn't have to write code inside the JavaScript. There's a lot of JavaScript code is already pre-written, and it can be invoked based on the requirement. So, for example, here, if the developer clicks on is email ID, automatically validation of email ID is done inside the JavaScript or a web page, or it can be at least one alphabet. So bottom line is all this code one doesn't need to write inside the uh, rule. They can be generated by the system when the web pages are uh, created. Similarly, as I told previously, the JavaScript can actually include various uh, WK Studio variables, and at runtime the JavaScript actually converts them into JavaScript equivalent variables so that the validations and other things can be done at runtime. Uh, WK Studio supports multilingual. Like here, if you see carefully, here language Hindi is selected, and there is a corresponding prompt. That means whenever a value is asked by a web page, it will show this as a prompt. And this is actually integrated through Google Translator API. So if this button is clicked, it automatically converts English text into corresponding selected language text. This is a menu interface which helps to have a predefined kind of values, including a lot of UI elements as a part of it. So here, for example, young lives options, is given, and there are like multiple options, first, second, third, and for each option, image can be selected. An image can be uploaded, based on the requirement. So this basically takes care of a lot of UI aspect at runtime, so that the code again need not be crowded at uh, rule level and so on. Similarly, here also you can see like look, Hindi language is used. So here option Hindi is selected, and this is again the translated text from Google Translator API. So at runtime, if the app is running in a multilingual mode, it automatically selects the particular options from that language. So again, one can see a page at runtime. Like there is an option to preview the web page. So whenever that option is clicked, you can see how a page is going to look like at runtime. And based on what control is selected. So here the control selected is a Dropbox. So it's actually showing Dropbox here. You know, Similarly, if it is a language text, it can actually, this is running in Hindi language now. So it's actually, here language selected is Hindi. So that's what in preview page, it's showing Hindi, language web page. So based on the context behind the scene, all the rules and everything will be written in English, but at front end or at input level is translated into particular. And these are all predefined web page. So it actually reduces a lot of load on the server at runtime. However, some of the pages actually uh, dynamically. That means they take the values at runtime from databases or from other source and so on. This is a lookup table interface. That means it's a data table interface. Like here, if you see this one checkbox, it's using database table. So this is like predefined queries, and with predefined database, it actually retrieves the data at runtime and loads that data into memory table and or data table, and they can be accessed at runtime. So this is just one example where this data is stored. So there is an option here, load values, show values. So I've just clicked on show values. So it's actually showing me a data table values stored in that particular data table, and it can be accessed using ID. For example, suppose I give ID 8. When I'm retrieving the value, it actually retrieves the value category, entity ID, L1, L2, and so on. Or I can write a query, for example, get me all the data starting with L1 is equal to money, this one. So all these functionalities can be possible. This is a rule interface. Like I'm on tab now, core engines. So here, if you see, this is a rule-based interface, and this is a rule editor. What you see here, this is a rule editor window. It uses a different colors for keywords, functions, and operators and letters, like a typical programming language code. It uses the different color combination based on the tokens which are used in the whatever program written. And as discussed earlier, this is one of the application, enterprise level application, having more than 75 rules as a part of it. So here, if you, for example, look at create app user, this is just one function, but it does a lot of job behind the scene. So there are a lot of high level functions like login app user, which takes the parameter and does a lot of things behind the scene. Similarly, call UDM function. This is again user predefined functions are there. There are more than 100 functions which are used to execute functionality behind the scene. The interface allows to access variable in each group. So, for example, there are multiple groups. So, whenever you select a particular group, the variables are populated, and then within that, what are the values that variable takes. However, it can be actually done at runtime also. Like if you say dot v, it actually displays what are the possible values of variable actually takes. For example, if you take leave as an example, employee dot leave, then there can be a casual leave, there can be earned leave, there can be a medical leave. So all these values will get populated, whenever a developer is writing a rule and so on. So this is like one of the function I was talking about. WK Studio has a universal data model. That means the enterprise level schema is already part of WK Studio, which has a lot of predefined functions. So the advantage is developer doesn't have to write a lot of code. So for example, here it actually says create simple party, and these are the parameters actually it takes at a runtime, and it creates the user. Party means it's like it can be an employee, it can be a student, or it can be any user for that matter. It's automatically created at the backend. No code is required. So there are many high-level session, database, matrix, memory table, data table functions supported by WK Studio programming language. This saves a lot of explicit coding inside the rule, making rules smaller. And it supports more than 345 functions in various categories. We'll see them down the line. And as you see, this is a rule interface, and there are a lot of options. For example, you can search a rule, you can add a rule after selected rule. You can create a new rule, add before, and you can change the name of the rule and so on. Okay, based on the coding requirement. Okay, so this is on the left hand side. I discussed these are like rules of an ERP kind of application having more than 75 plus rules, each rule corresponding to a specific functionality. For example, create a new card invokes a new form to enter a card details and so on. Rules can have many conditional statements depending on the functionality implemented. This rule is generic rule, which actually updates a lot of entries like item, party, transaction, and so on. Okay, and as you say now, WK Studio supports various control statement like switch and kind of statement and so on. This is an expanded view of rule editor, so a developer can actually edit the rule in a bigger window compared to the smaller window and so on. This is like uh, when a developer clicks on view rules, it actually shows rule in a more tree-like format, where tree can be expanded or it can be collapsed. Then it actually connects a lot of rule if there are sub rules or something, connected to modify. So rules can be added, modified in rule tree format, and it automatically connects the rule based on the hierarchy and dependency. So this is an example like new statement can be added, existing can be updated, or one statement can be moved from one rule to another rule and so on, and then can be copied and pasted and so on. So there are multiple things can be done using UI based operation. This is a show dependency. That means when the rules are compiled, they are actually, developer can write the rules without bothering about the hierarchy, but internally the reasoning engine automatically connects them. So for example, here there is a rule for, plant is short, and there are three statements here, but they are actually sub part of, for example, rule deficiency observed is phosphorus, is one. So it can go to any level, up to 5 level or 6 level, depending on the how rules are written and so on. As discussed earlier, WK Studio programming language has 345 functions, operators, and control statements, and there is a lot of tool tip and online help is available whenever required. So this is just a sample, help. So for example, add to data. I think the selection is add to data, which is selected. So here you can see this function add to date, and these are all possible combinations. You can actually retrieve a day part, month part, year part, or quarter part depending on the requirement. And whenever a particular function is selected, automatically the possible values are actually populated. So for example, this function get from memory table, it retrieves a particular data based on the condition or any particular row or particular column can be retrieved. So here it shows a row can be retrieved, row can be retrieved in string, column can be retrieved, column with IDs can be retrieved. So there are options, based on the requirement and so on. Again, whatever various objects like database object or ML object or menu objects which are used uh, you know, in a particular project, they can be accessed in a rule. So for example, here it's showing artificial neural network. It shows case-based reasoning. So here, for example, a dynamic query is selected. So whenever a dynamic query is selected, automatically it actually populates whatever dynamic query is used in the project. So here, for example, for a cart application, there are many predefined queries are there. For example, DQ cart status, DQ first ID, and so advantages they can be easily added into code or any other objects which is actually using queries as a part of it. User defined function allows to create reusable function. So this is one function which actually says whenever a target entity ID changes, what to do. Here again, there are options. For example, here Python can be integrated. It can be a PL/SQL PL, or it can be an external API. And here there are Google APIs and other APIs are connected. Again, functions can be created for multiple uh, purposes. It can be a general purpose function, or it can be a function whenever a particular variable value is added, what is need to be done, or whenever needed kind of, or it can be an objective function of a genetic algorithm and so on. So functions, even they can be used as a transformation. Whenever a data is fetched from database, it can actually transform the value into whatever values needed and so on. This is WK Studio programming language help. There are large number of functions which are supported. They are actually categorized into different categories. So these are all neural network functions. So you can create a new neural network, you can get an NN, reset NN, and so on. Then there are functions, for example, various app management functions. So create app user, remove app user, get app user type. These are functions which actually help in uh, app user management and so on. There are a lot of control function like a typical programming language: if, then, else, switch, while, for functions supported by WK Studio programming language. There are database functions, for example, call DB routine. It just calls a SP. No need to write a code to call SP, and you can pass the parameter. You can even pass the out parameter to that. And SP can be called from Oracle. It can be from SQL Server, or it can be from Postgres, or from MySQL and so on. So you can delete the data from database without requiring any code to explicitly return and so on. There are file functions supported. So for example, load document from DB. So it can be a JSON document, it can be an it can be XML document and so on. So basically, it needs an access to a particular server directory. And this is typically done since it's a multi-tenant architecture. User is restricted to access the data only within a specific folders and so on. Lookup table allows to retrieve the data at runtime from memory tables, math functions, and again there are a lot of memory table functions which specifically used to store the data and retrieve the data, manipulate the data based on requirements. Similarly, there are a lot of matrix function. In fact, WK Studio programming allows you as a developer to multiply matrix, to inverse the matrix. The large number of functions are part of it. Then there are Python functions which can be used. For example, call Python API, call Python function. So libraries can be included using external source, and then code can be executed. It can even create an instance, and that instance can be a function in that instance can be executed, or a variable in that instance can be initialized, and so on. The large number of session functions provided to keep track of sessions, store the session in database. You can restart from a particular session. That means suppose a session is going on and user wants to stop at a particular point. The entire session can be stored in database or in XML file on a client itself, and it can be again restored back to continue what the user has left, back and so on. This is consolidated list of all the functions supported by WK Studio programming language. Okay, as you said, it's a big list of function and so on. And then each function has a detailed help available. So, for example, ML config. So this is a help about ML config. So basically, this execute the tasks for selected ML config and returns the result. And parameters are actually can be passed at runtime, or they can be retrieved from database by just giving the ID. Now this is a code simple like run the regression model in a training that it's saying, and take the data where ID is greater than equal to 1. Okay, and then it says show only stat and so on, and these are all runtime parameters like based on what algorithm or APIs written behind the scene, the parameters can be passed them at runtime. Similarly, like if you take a function get from DB, it actually shows like data can be retrieved from database. So what are the parameters? Database ID, and optionally can be a table name. Then what is a query from where the data is going to be retrieved, and this is externally defined. And what is an option to be retrieved? So if you see here, there are many options. It can be a set, it can be a characteristic set, it can be a card, comma delimited, or it can be a complete record itself, which actually is in list format. This one. So if you see this result, it actually has retrieved the entire you know data from database by executing the function. Now within that option, there are like, for example, here, this is an option used to retrieve the data, and there is a extensive help available what exactly it does. Like for example, here if you use the parameter JSON, that means it gets the data in JSON format. I think there's a need to change the documentation. WK Studio has extensive help interface, like any help required about the interface, that's actually part of it. So, for example, here if you just type chart here, it shows the document which actually shows how the charts are drawn in WK Studio. WK Studio has a graphic charting function which has large number of parameters to set, like a typical charting tool. You can actually set the colors, ranges, then grid type, legends, then you can set markers, marker size, type of markers, and so on. All these are possible. And again, WK Studio is integrated with JQuePlot. So finally, the charts can be rendered using JQuePlot, and there's a integration done with the database as well as core code of the WK Studio JQuePlot. Now Plotly is also integrated, so uh, you know the developer can configure to display the charts using Plotly, which is an open source. This is just document showing working with Python in WK Studio, how Python code can be written and integrated into WK Studio. This is working with JavaScript in WK Studio, how JavaScript actually take the like various validation and like script based on the requirement and so on.